Welcome to Costa Rica, everybody. I wanted to talk a little bit about this syndrome that I call don't want to see syndrome. Something that I hear from my clients all the time in these hourly consults is that I don't want to see something like an HVAC grill in the rooms that I'm in. And that's why now we have these built-in, like mudded in linear slot diffusers that become part of the drywall, which are both a lot more expensive and also very difficult to change after the fact. And if you don't want to see those, is it okay if we see exposed ductwork or soffits? No, I don't want to see those either. And if we don't have any room for HVAC ductwork at all, then are you okay with seeing ductless mini split heads on the wall or in the ceiling? No, I don't want to see those either. And I think really what this adds up to is this kind of epidemic of hiding things and denying that we actually need things to make life work. Something like ceiling fans, which is, I think, kind of a requirement for HVAC in general for all homes technically, is just an ability to mix air around. Some people just don't want to see that. And so I know this video is going to make some of you mad. And it's going to touch a nerve, I hope, because Americans have this hiding mentality. And I wanted to show you some of the ways that Latin America in general and La Gente approach construction and the way that we put our homes together, the way they see things, that I think could be healthy for us to try and work more into our project. So if you're planning a renovation or an addition, or you're planning your dream home, maybe some of these ideas will help you to come up with a smarter or more elegant or easier way to go about some of this stuff. Now, there are 4 main ways that I think that they do this right, or that are different enough from the way we do things that they are very worth exploring. First is that they have an acceptance of more wild textures. They don't just need everything to be vanilla and sterile and kind of smooth and squared off. They also have a much bigger respect for the structural and mechanical elements of a building. They build into their buildings a tutorial on how to build this. It's kind of like every building is its own blueprint. And lastly, this makes everything easier to maintain and take care of. Let's get into it. So first, more wild textures. This kind of, not the opposite, but very different than our sanitized version of like green grass, monoculture lawn, squared off everything, nice clean sidewalk, nice clean grass, nice clean walls, everything being the same color within. They have different colors within the raw materials that they're building with. It's mostly concrete and steel, which we'll talk about more when we talk about the functional elements. But you can see that they're happy with angles, with like sharp angles on things, with things not being quite squared off, with things looking more handmade. Of course, they care about what things look like. They have ornamental plantings all over the place. These just little shrubs that do nothing. They're just for how things look. Also, look at the fresh coats of paint all over everything in this country. They are not afraid to take care of things and just spruce them up with a coat of paint to make it look nicer. Bus stops, for example. This is one of the bus stops here in this country, and you might think, ew, they obviously don't care what that looks like. This is the bus stop that's outside of our house in Atlanta. We don't care what bus stops look like either. A lot of this comes down to money, like availability of money and what we think is worth spending money on. Part of the reason I wanted to make this video is because I think we spend some money on the wrong things. And that goes for our government, and it goes for our families as well. If you're working with a designer, just know they have this syndrome of, I want everything to be clean and straight and flat and monocolor. And I think that that's something that we could kind of ease off. There are some things that they do here that are actually smarter than the way that we do things. They have something called living fences, which is very different than this just simple construction fence. These living fences are, instead of planting rows of fence posts, they plant trees, which become the fence posts, and then they just run the wire between the trees. Now these trees are fruiting. They're places where the animals can come and eat the fruit, and it's just like it's good for the view, it's good for the landscape, it's good for the ecology of that environment. And by the way, that's very important for some place like Costa Rica, because this place has something like 6% of the entire world's biodiversity within this one country. So they recognize it as not just the right thing to do kind of, and it's nice, but it's also an economic argument for them. And that's all something that necessarily fits into the challenges that we'll get into at the end of this video, because of course some of you are saying right now, even in this first element that I'm talking about, but we have different things that we have to deal with here. And yes, we're going to get into that later in the video. Next, they respect structural and mechanical elements of a building. And I think that this is a really something that I have glommed onto, having built our home. One of my favorite rooms in our home is the mechanical room, which is technically 2,200 square feet big. It's only 4 feet tall. It's our little conditioned crawl space we got down there. I love that space because you can see all the things that make the house work. And for your situation, just think about going to a car show. Any fancy car show you go to, they open the hood to show you the beautiful engine and how perfect, and it's just like perfect symmetry and all the things, and it's like the beauty of the functionality of something even like the human body if you study anatomy or biology. That's the stuff, that's the good stuff, not the covering up of that. Like, skin is nice, but really the guts and your bones and all that stuff are like, that's the life, you know? So the way that they're doing this, the same way as like a motorcycle has an exposed engine on purpose, they think that it's pretty too, is something that you can use in the way that you think about this stuff. You might have seen on any of the social media platforms that are showing you pictures of beautiful things, this exposed plumbing and exposed electrical conduit fad that's going around, which I think is great. And I will remind you, in thinking about those pictures of like very beautiful exposed plumbing, copper pipes that are perfectly squared off and everything is aligned and it's like art. What you are doing generally when you're thinking about the other way, other with a capital O, is comparing a very sloppy version of something you don't like to an idealized version of something you do like. So if you're thinking about this perfect room still, of the clean drywall with no plugs, no vents, no nothing, no ceiling fan overhead, the kind of drywall job you are describing is called a level 5 drywall job. That is not something that everyone gets. I know, because we have drywall in our house, and like when you catch it when the light is coming in through the window and it bounces off the ceiling, that does not look very good. So in reality, you're not going to get an idealized version of whatever it is that you're thinking. You're going to get a real life version, which is fine, but you're not going to get the sloppiest version of exposed anything next to an idealized version of this. They're both going to be kind of like real life, and you can work to pay attention to detail, which is what this whole channel is about, to make things better than they would typically be if you didn't actually do all of the planning and the quality control during the way. The other thing is that we're building mostly, as you can see behind me, with concrete and steel. And those are very functional elements. You have to build with that here. In Costa Rica specifically, there is an earthquake every day, maybe several times a day. So concrete, building your walls with concrete, is in the code. They have to do that. It turns out that metal and concrete are really easygoing. They're very resistive to moisture damage. So that's very nice. It happens to be wonderful that, like, if you have a metal roof, the metal roof over time, yes, will rust, can easily be replaced, which we're going to talk about next. But the concrete wall can be wet 100% of the time. And that's also not a problem as long as you take care of the maintenance, which again is next. In general, concrete and metal are going to mean that we have less problems drying around here because we don't have so many layers of plastic within the walls, within these multiple layers that we're using to hide and, you know, sandwich things together. And when things do get wet, we can dry them out a lot faster. Third thing is that these buildings are kind of like a tutorial unto themselves. So if you're a curious person, you can kind of see exactly how to build things like this. You've got the metal frame that goes on. Maybe that goes in first. Maybe there's these concrete posts that they're putting in, or they build a cinder block wall. They've now plastered that. You can see the framing and how everything is welded together. So if you're curious, you could basically figure out how to build anything in this country if you're paying attention to the right things. I'm sure that's helpful for people who are trying to learn here. In the States, when I was trying to learn to build the tiny house, it was not totally clear to me how things were put together, because you look at the skin of an animal, for example, if you haven't seen the skeleton, you have no idea what the anatomy is supposed to be like. In the States, when I had to learn how to build, I had to really get my head around like how all of the framing and the cavities and the layers went together, and then how you do things that are kind of outside the norm. If you're just putting a wall and a wall, that's really easy, but of course we just don't do that. We're going to add architectural elements and design, and all that becomes more difficult. Here, you can see all that stuff, and so you can be like, oh, that's how you would do that next time I'm out thinking about this. Of course, outside the States, we have multi-generational families living together-ish, at least, and within a family, you would have to have one person who could weld and one person who could do masonry of some kind, concrete and mortar and things like that. And that's basically it. You could do most of the things here as long as you've got somebody to plaster over things and somebody weld the fixes together. This is kind of all you need to be able to do this. You don't need master carpenters. You don't need all this. Like, we got this kind of, again, the wild textures. You could do things that look kind of handmade, and that's okay here. That's part of the landscape. And this brings us to our last point, which is ease of repair and of maintenance. If you can see what is wrong, because you can see the guts of everything you're working on, you don't have to do nearly as much demolition. You don't make as big of a mess. It doesn't take as long. You know exactly what needs to be fixed and what needs to be replaced. I think that would be dreamy, personally. Also, if you're using really easy to work with and widely available materials, which might be a little flimsier and not so permanent, it makes it easier for anybody in your family to make certain fixes within the repairs that need to be done on your house. Case in point, in our hotel that we're staying in today, which is very nice, there's funny sounds and funny smells coming out of this sink. So you just have a look underneath just to make sure that the plumbing is correct. And this doesn't have a P-trap in it. So they installed one of these flexible things but didn't actually build the P-trap in. And so, let me get my thing around here first. You can easily, boom. Now there's a little area for water collect here so that we don't allow the sewer gas to back up. Unfortunately, what I found out when I did this the first time is that we're not actually glued in. So there's no getting rid of the funny sounds, because when you flush the toilet, it does kind of mess with this fitting also, but whatever, it's fine now that the smell of the sewer gas isn't coming up in there. Also, these hard surfaces, concrete, tile, metal, means that if something does get wet, the roof, metal roof leaks, it gets holes in it. Yeah, that happens. Water gets in. Now, we don't have wall-to-wall carpet that needs to all be ripped out, and we need to do a mold remediation and all this stuff and explore the mold inside the drywall. We don't have any drywall. We have plaster. You can take up the rugs, take them to the laundromat. You can wash the tile floor and the plaster walls, and the mold is gone. And really, that's what this is about, is mold is the symptom, not the problem itself. So, like, as long as you are doing maintenance, which everyone here accepts as a part of life, and I think that we have gone a little too far in general about trying to make life maintenance free. You'll see a lot of tiny houses where we started out, we built our tiny lab to show people building science, and a lot of the tiny house people are obsessed with trying to live a maintenance free life. I want no mortgage. I don't want to pay $1 ever again. I don't want to have to take care of things. That's insane. You must take care of things, and every maintenance is life, life is maintenance. And so here, it's healthy. Everybody's like, yeah, cool, let's wash the floor together. And it's like not a terrible chore, it's just something that you do. Also, as far as durability goes, within the high performance space, I think we take this a little too far in general too. We're kind of focusing on these really long-term durability targets. The reason that you are focused on that durability is because we're building out of stuff that's a little bit more precious and a little bit more difficult to work with if it does get wet. Drywall, for example, right? Or OSB, particle board. Some people call it wood. So the types of materials that they're using, I think, have some superiorities in the way that they're approaching this. And lastly, these hard surfaces mean that we have less chemicals and particles getting into them, like carpet being the nightmare, but drywall has chemicals going into the drywall. And then once it's in there, doing chemistry, which is changing chemical reactions to make new chemicals, none of that stuff is happening on top of concrete and metal for the most part, and glass. So that is another benefit of this kind of approach. Now, of course, as I said, there are some challenges to how we would interpret this way of approaching buildings in different climates in the United States. This is a beautiful climate, and it's kind of like 70 to 80 degrees all the time. They have a wet season, they have a dry season, but like, it's not that hard. So if you're building in Minneapolis or in Maryland or in Arizona, you might have some different things to deal with, and do you need to add insulation for that? How exactly are we going to use this approach to buildings and also build more layers, but not hide so much stuff in those layers or hide the layers themselves? So I'm just putting that out there. Also, we have things like codes that we have to deal with that people in Latin America might not have as much of. For one example would be fire code. So we have to have cladding over flammable elements that can withstand a certain amount of sustained fire, right? And we lived in Chicago, And that they're more crazy about fire safety there because the whole city burned down than in other places. And so you have to kind of deal with that. And so yeah, the layers get in the way there. You also have coatings that you're gonna need, for example, on like spray foam, the intumescent coating to make it more fire resistant. It's not fireproof at that point by any means, but those are things that are gonna kind of get in your way. So I just wanted to kind of start this conversation. As you travel around the world, just keep an open mind and look around, observe the way that people do things differently, and see what we can take back and make our process better. Because of course, there is no new knowledge anywhere. It's just everything you're dealing with on YouTube, in your neighborhood, in your country that you live in, if you're not in the US, is based on current fads. And we just need to be able to recognize when something is a fad and when something is like tried and true actual knowledge that's very useful wisdom. So please do comment below if you have other examples of this, whether it's in Latin America or elsewhere. Like, subscribe, tune in next time.